Good day to everyone. We're so glad you can join us on day 4 of the Call to Action to Change Child Welfare Conference. This is our 7th keynoter of our across our time thus far, and we're so delighted to have Vivek Sankaran, who is a clinical professor of law from the University of Michigan Law School. He's going to be presenting on the fight to preserve relationships, managing setbacks while celebrating the wins. Before I turn it over to Vivek, I want to just give you a little bit of his bio. He is a national recognized leader in family defense law and child welfare reform, a former skating fellow and founder of the Detroit Center for Family Advocacy. He has litigated before the Michigan Supreme Court, authored numerous influential articles and books, many which I really enjoy and love, and led national efforts to strengthen family voice and legal protections in the child welfare system. He brings extensive experience representing children and parents navigating abuse and family separation proceedings within the child welfare system, and is widely known for approaching his work with empathy and fairness. And he has earned multiple honors, including the 2023 John W. Reed Michigan Lawyer Legacy Award and Michigan's Parent Attorney of the Year. And I can just say that I remember sitting in an audience, I don't even know how many years ago, Vivek, and I was like, who is this angel? Because I felt like you're just speaking our language, but doing so at a time where it wasn't necessarily um, heard of. And so you were really a pioneer in your boldness and in your thinking. And so we're just so grateful from the Kempe Center and our conference group to have you here with us. So please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, and thank you to everybody who is joining us from all over the world today to talk about what I think is an incredibly important topic, which is how do we navigate setbacks when we're doing really hard work. And I want to kind of set the stage for those on the call to 2024. As Lisa said, my background is representing children and parents in the child protective system. And one of the things I've been doing for the last about 15 years or so is leading an appellate clinic in Michigan where we represent parents in termination of parental rights appeals. And one of my life's work, and so the issues that I really care deeply about is getting courts to consider other alternatives before they terminate parental rights. I think I actually gave a talk for this conference a couple of years ago about that issue, about exploring other opportunities because of what I think children lose when parental rights are unnecessarily terminated. It really stems from my work representing kids in DC for 5 years, then representing kids in Michigan, and now working with parents. And so for years and years, we've been, fighting this fight where we're trying to get the court systems to recognize that the federal constitution, because there's fundamental right involved, really requires courts to look at other alternatives. And for years, we've been losing, right? Losing that argument over and over again at state courts. But our students, one of the benefits of being a law professor is I get to work with the brightest and most passionate students anywhere, and they always have the energy to raise creative new arguments. And so in 2024, we had a series of cases where we again raised these arguments and lost at the intermediate court, but we pursued it with our state Supreme Court, the Michigan Supreme Court. And I received what I thought was the gift of a career, which is that they ordered oral argument in 2 cases where they framed the issue as well as I could have seen framed, which is, it was almost as if we had written it. That does the federal constitution require courts to consider less restrictive alternatives prior to terminating parental rights? And this was the gift we had been looking for years. And I had joked to my colleagues and my friends that if I win this case, I think I was just going to retire from child welfare because my work has been done. And so we, prepped the case. We had an incredible team working on briefs. We recruited amicus briefs from all over the political spectrum. We had conservative groups and liberal groups and kids' rights advocates and parents' rights advocates all coalescing around a theme that, from the perspective of kids and families, this was a good thing. So we get to oral argument, and I got to present an oral argument for about 15 minutes on this case, and it went really well. I thought the questions were fair but and tough, but also showed some willingness to adopt the position that I wanted. And in that moment, standing at the Michigan Supreme Court, I was so excited that the world that I was hoping to create, that was my life's work and my passion, was exactly what was likely to happen based on what I had observed at the oral argument. And that was in May of 2024. And then I waited all of May and all of June, waiting for an opinion to be written in the case. Then I waited for all of July for an opinion to be written in a case. And under our court rules or statutes, the Supreme Court of Michigan has to issue a decision by the end of July and then they start their new term. And so I was just waiting and waiting. I had a trip planned to Iceland and waiting for the decision to come, and it didn't. And so I got on an airplane, went to Iceland. It was nearing the end of the month. I think it was like July 31st at the point. And I remember sitting in Iceland at an Airbnb in a beautiful part of just outside of Reykjavik. And I'm at this point just, constantly checking my email to ask for the opinion to come out, and nothing was out. And then I received an email, and I still remember exactly where I was sitting in this Airbnb from a colleague, another lawyer in Michigan, and all the email said on it was, "I'm so sorry. What are your next steps in light of the setback?" And at that moment in time, I had no idea what she was talking about because I had not received the opinion. I had not seen it. So immediately I went to the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court's website to check what was going on. And there it was. And it was not even an opinion ruling against me. It was one line that said that after oral argument, they had decided, which is their right, not to take the case in both of the cases that I had argued at the Supreme Court of Michigan. And so here I was, having spent the last several years of my career fighting this issue, having it teed up the way I wanted it to get teed up, having and recruited and the efforts of law firms and nonprofits all across the country, to all of that work to get dismissed in a handful of sentences by the majority of the court, was devastating. And what was even more devastating for me was also the idea that I had to make now two phone calls to a father in one case, a mother in the other case, to tell them that despite all of this optimism that I had and that the field had, that their rights would remain terminated. And so in the aftermath, I felt incredibly dejected and quite hopeless. And I didn't know it at the time, but researcher Kristen Neff, who does a lot of self-compassion work, would have said that I was experiencing at that moment the very opposite of self-compassion, right? I was experiencing self-judgment. I should have argued it differently, right? That I'd failed these families that had put so much into me to represent them. I felt like a sense of isolation. Like, was I just kind of a crappy lawyer and I'm the only one who lost like this, and everyone else was winning their cases and doing good work? Because that's what you often see when you go out there and look at the listservs. And I think I was over identifying with the defeat instead of experiencing it as just another loss. It was almost internalizing that I was not as adequate of a lawyer as I could have been. And so as I do this work, when we push systems and we do tough things, we will experience professional setbacks. And that's kind of the heart of what I want to talk to you all about. And throughout this conversation, I want to use the chat function to really get you all to share as much as you're willing. And so, and we'll incorporate that into the conversation. And so, as you hear me describe this experience, I'm wondering if you could describe in the chat either a professional setback and how you felt, right? How you felt, what happened, and kind of the emotions that you had. For me, it was one of complete devastation and loss and almost a feeling of hopelessness. And so I want to start and just give you all like about 10 seconds to just put in the chat, from all over the world, um, how you feel, like the internal emotions that you experience when you experience a professional setback similar to the one that I have. And so feel free to, use the chat function to write any messages in there that kind of resonate with you, as I told the story of sort of my life's work and how I felt in that moment. Yeah. So the chat comes in, disappointment, right? When we're representing kids and parents and working with, with real at-risk families, it's normal to feel disappointed, defeated, crushed. I love the word furious that's being put in there because I was angry. I was angry at something that I had seen that was just so obvious in as the right result, and I was exhausted. Right, that feeling that I'd put so much time into something that I'd just gotten eliminated by one sentence. Tired, discouraged, defeated, lost, heartbreak. Right, this question of did I do enough? And so one of the elements of self-compassion is this idea of common humanity. And one of the ways that we get common humanity is by recognizing that we are not the only ones who are experiencing this. Right? We live in a world where we don't always share sort of the internal feelings that we're experiencing. And one of the reasons I love conversations like this is you see, right, that folks have this common feeling, right? Why do I bother? It doesn't matter in the end. What do I do? Where do I go from here? A question that I was wrestling with as I was going through this. And so what I want to chat about is how do we recover from this? Right? How do we, keep doing this hard work? Because if we do the work well and we do it hard, we should be experiencing setbacks because we should be pushing systems in ways that systems don't like to be pushed. So Kristen Neff, who we talked about a little bit earlier, who does so much self-compassion work, recognizes three essential components to this. One is self-kindness instead of self-judgment. One is common humanity instead of isolation, and the other is mindfulness instead of over-identification with our pain. And in the weeks after these losses, I had none of them, right? As I said, I was really struggling. But I wanted to share a little bit of my journey, and what happened when I started to find them in some unlikely places. And so the first thing that shifted for me, and came from two unexpected places. I did a podcast with my friend Matt Anderson, who ran a podcast called The Proximity Process, because I wanted to process these losses, and he gave me space to do that. Um, and one of the things that happened soon after I started processing these losses is that emails started coming from both lawyers and from my clients in the cases. So an example of an email I received from a lawyer from Washington State. She wrote to me, "I heard your podcast experience and appearance. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. I was actually feeling quite down as well. I lost a state Supreme Court case here in Washington, and it may be a worse loss than yours." Then she wrote me this line. "I had saved a bottle of champagne to open when I won the case. I was that confident, and now I just stare at the unopened bottle in my fridge every day." So that image that's just stuck in my mind, that unopened champagne bottle, she got it. She knew how I was feeling. Another wrote, "I tend to disconnect and internalize after losses, and it's helpful to know that the people I view as, quote, legends in this field have the same exact experience." And it was comforting to know for him to know that even those he thought were, quote unquote, legends experienced what he was going through. Then another lawyer from Pennsylvania wrote me and said, "I filed an amicus which is a friend of the court brief in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, where the court unanimously held against me and said that the agency's failure to make efforts to reunify a family is not relevant in a termination of parental rights trial. And if you pull up the case," she wrote, "there is my name listed as the only amicus in that case. It was devastating holding for our clients that they're still living with. I truly thought about leaving the field that year." But then she said something so powerful. She said, "When I look back, I'm so glad to be here to see all that happened in child welfare and family defense over the past 10 years. We are miles and miles from justice, but I personally can't wait to see all that we've accomplished by 2034. After a professional setback, we all feel like we're on our own. but we're not. Like we've all gone through this. Again, if you're pushing systems and fighting hard, you should experiencing setbacks. You'd be experiencing setbacks all the time. And then the part that really broke me open was hearing out from clients, both current and former clients, the very clients that I thought that I had failed when I lost my Supreme Court cases. So one of the parents in the case, Catherine, she lost her appeal, and her parental rights were terminated. And I was dreading reaching out to her to share this news and to offer comfort. But this is what she had written to me. As one might expect, I took the news with extreme sadness, and upon leaving work, I called my sponsor and went to many meetings, AA, this weekend. I attend my home group on Saturday mornings, was able to let them know I was struggling. I have support in spades, and I believe both this, as well as my honesty about the hardship of it, allowed me to remain sober. I have great gratitude for that, and I cannot imagine much news that I would receive with the same degree of difficulty. She lost her child and she was still staying sober. She was reaching out for support. She was naming her struggle honestly. And then she said this: I truly appreciate all your hard work and efforts in this so very much. Despite the outcome, because of you, I can say that we fought till the very end. She was comforting me in my moment of suffering. This is a parent who had lost her parental rights, reaching out to support me, comforting the lawyer who had lost her case. And I don't know if you can understand what that did to me, because I had been so consumed with my own failure, my own shame, and here was this mother in the middle of unimaginable grief saying, "You didn't fail me. I fought till the very end." And then another former client reached out. I had shared with her because she had been part of this journey as well. I shared with her what had happened in the case, and she had written. She was rooting for these families, that she wasn't even involved in the case. And she said, I've been so hopeful for these families. I feel deeply for these families. She was feeling for other families, even though she'd been through her own version of hell in the child welfare system. She was another one of the cases that we should have won on her behalf. I still remember the Court of Appeals argument in her case, where my student got up and we thought we had the best arguments to raise, and we were going to win our appeal. And about 2 seconds into the oral argument, um, one of the judges just started berating my student in a way that I have never experienced before, and I had never have experienced since. And it was so bad that my student, who we had prepped, wasn't ready to be berated in public before this judge. And one of the bailiffs had to get her a tissue because she started tearing up. Not exactly the way that any oral argument should go, and not one that signaled that we were going to win. And so after the argument, I feared reaching out to this client, because we all knew that we were going to lose this appeal, even before we had gotten the written decision, which we ultimately did lose the appeal. And so as I was reaching the phone, getting ready to talk to this client, I noticed I had an email in my inbox. And before I had even reached out to this client had reached out to me to check in to see how my student was doing, because she was worried about her and she thought it was so unfair as to how this judge that had treated my student. I mean, this client, Anna, had given me such an important lesson on kinship, that when we're in relationships with others, we can get through many, many hard things together. And that as a lawyer, I had always viewed these relationships as one-dimensional, that I was giving my clients something. And if I couldn't deliver, then I had failed them. And what I had missed was that it is a sort of a mutual relationship where we're in this together. And that if you form that bond with people that you represent, our job in this muck of life where we're all struggling and suffering in so many ways, is to try to lift each other up and try to build each other as much as we can. And so this is what she wrote to me after she had recognized that I was suffering. My client had written this to me after the loss. She said, "You inspire me, you share our deepest, most human emotions, and you steadily carry on, working relentlessly to the final word. It is all that can be done. And though there are many grave losses, the life you pour into these cases is making progress in countless ways. I don't know how you do it." And then she ended by saying, "Let me be a reminder for you to feel refreshed and renewed by telling you how important you are in my life. Simply knowing you're out there teaching better ways to your students and peers and sharing support." Like she wanted to remind me, right, to refresh me. And then she shared her own glimmers of hope. I've absolutely found a new breath in life and hope, serenity and peace in ways I've never felt before. I am okay. We are okay. Our family's happy even though we are not all together in person. We have a lot of love. Even when not all together, she had found a way to hold both grief and love together. And then she ended with this line, right? The work to create more just systems is never ending, and I'm determined to provide support and share hope through experiences to help people through the darkness that some of us must endure to see brighter days and a healthier system. So just for a minute, like reflect together what this means, right? This for me is Kristen Neff's common humanity in action, but from a place that I had never expected ever. I thought that I was alone in my failure. But Catherine, my client in that case, showed me that even in loss, we can support one another. Anna, my client in the other case, showed me that parents who've been through the system understand this work and how hard it is in ways that no one else can. And what they taught me was that suffering and failure aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They're part of the shared human experience. And sometimes the people who understand the best are the ones who have suffered the most. So these emails didn't fix the losses, right? They didn't. Catherine's rights are still terminated, as are Anna's. But knowing that I wasn't alone in the process, that I was part of this journey, knowing that even my clients saw the fight as meaningful, that changed something fundamental in me. So common humanity, right? That's one of the anchors of navigating setbacks is recognizing that you're not alone. That just like the chat function said a second ago, is that that many of us share this common experience of having setbacks. But I was still beating myself up in so many ways until my clients taught me something else. Right after the losses, the voice in my head was still relentless in that I should have argued it differently. You should have been better. You let those families down. I remember there's a tactical choice that I had made as I was getting ready for this argument. It was actually two separate cases that were being argued, but they both raised the same issues. And so I suggested to the court that we combine oral argument in the case, in both cases, because there was a such overlap in the issues that we were dealing with. The court granted the request, and then about 2 minutes into the argument, I realized that that was a total mistake of a tactical move, because the court was confusing the facts of both cases. As I was doing the oral argument, I realized that there are different issues that were being raised. And I was just kicking myself after the fact, after I had lost, that I had made a tactical distinction, a mistake that then caused this matter to not go the way that I want. Um, but then in modeling self-kindness, you had both of my clients telling me things that was really the self-kindness that I should have offered to myself, right? So Catherine saying, despite the outcome, because of you, I can say I fought to the very end. Anna writing, it is all that can be done. All that can be done. Not you should have done more. Not that if you were better, you would have won. Just you did all that you can do. And so here, if Catherine, who had lost her child, could extend that kind of grace to me, could I extend it to myself in that situation? Could you all extend it to yourselves? If Anna, who'd been separated from her daughter, could say, you inspire me, could I stop calling myself a failure in that moment? Right? One day, a colleague asked me if I came to you and told you that I'd lost a case like this, like, what would you say to me? And I immediately knew what I would say, right? All of us on this call say it to our colleagues all the time, right? That you tell them that they fought hard, that the system failed them, that lawyers can only control so much, child welfare professionals can only control so much, and so much is out of our control, right? I've said that countless times to others. But often, how often can we not say that to ourselves in that moment that we are struggling? Kristen Neff's research shows us that self-kindness isn't about being self-indulgent. It's actually more motivating and gets us to do so much more than self-criticism does. When we beat ourselves up, we freeze, we give up. And when we treat ourselves with compassion, we stay in the fight. And my clients were modeling this for me, right? My client, Catherine, who had lost her rights, her first pivot was to go to AA meetings and to stay sober, to reach out for support. She named her struggle honestly. And Anna kept finding glimmers of hope even in family separation. They were practicing self compassion in situations that were far harder than mine. So part of self kindness is figuring out for all of you on this call, what are the things you need to do to restore your energy, to find joy? For me, it was, in the months after the loss, is figuring out like how could I rejuvenate myself, spending time in nature, coaching my kids in basketball, playing sports, pickleball, basketball, golf. And so really leaning into that. We all need this. And yet, too often, those of us who are serving others in public interest spaces struggle to pivot to this because we do find that it is self-indulgent, right? We find that it's the actual the extra thing we get to do once we do everything else. And we all need to make that pivot to recognize that for us to do the hard work that we do, we have to figure out how to discover joy within our own lives. I read yesterday in the New York Times a interview of the civil rights legend Brian Stevenson, who has just opened up a new hotel in Montgomery, Alabama, called Elevate, I believe. And in the interview, he stated this: more than ever, those who are courageous enough not to be silent, to pursue the truth of history, are going to need shelter. They're going to need protection. They're going to need help to navigate this moment. And to me, this is the heart of self kindness, right? Recognizing that for each of us, we need the things that keep us energized, that reconnect us to ourselves, who restore our energy before we go and do the hard work. And so I want to invite folks just to pause on this for a moment and put in the chat, what are the things that you do to really restore yourselves when you face a setback? Right? What are the ways that you find joy that you want to share with the other people on this webinar? Where do you go for refuge? Right? When you need to take that deep breath and just take that moment to relax and to create some space. And so, if you could share in the chat function, what are some of the things that you do to kind of center yourself? When things go awry and the work doesn't go as well as you do. And so, I mean, they're coming in the chat right now, right? Praying, self-reflection, right? A lot of folks have journaling habits and mindfulness habits. Nature, so much research out there about the restorative practices of just getting out and going into nature. One of the recent initiatives that I've been involved in is leading retreats for judges, lawyers, and other child welfare professionals in nature for 2 days on reflecting on their own struggles in the work and how to create spaces where others can be honest in their struggle and that we can support one another as we navigate them. But key to that retreat has been being in nature and getting our systems to take a deep breath. Anything outside is peaceful. A long drive in a car, on the land. Look at the themes of nature, walking the dogs, cooking a meal, going to the gym, right? Just because we're doing hard things doesn't mean that we have to deny for ourselves the power of joy, time with family. So much of the themes that we hear from people are connections, right? Forming connections with others, with our friendships, family, whatever that comes to you. Watching the birds, right? Noticing exercises, really paying attention and making sure our brains are wired to recognize both the bad things going on, but also like the many good things that are going on all over the place every single minute. I love the theme about pets and animals um, and spending time with loved ones, music, right? Play, some of the declutter a small area. This is just kind of a great list. And so, one of the things I would really encourage you to do is figure out for yourself what those restorative practices are in. You're doing your best in a system and in systems that are deeply broken. We control so few of the outcomes that we're working with. And so having a little bit of humility and recognizing what is in our control, but what is truly out of control, and recognizing that your work still matters, right? This is the heart of self-kindness. The third part of the self-compassion framework is really this idea of mindfulness, which is how do you hold the pain without drowning in it, right? And so I think once again, my clients who responded to me after after the loss, model that, right? So you think about the email that I got from Catherine, right, who said in her email to me, after the losses, I kept swinging between two extremes. Either I try to suppress it, I need to move on, focus on the next thing, or she got consumed by it, right? Replaying every moment. And the idea of how do we get this balanced awareness, right? Neither ignoring the pain nor being swallowed by it, saying that it hurts. I'm going to feel it, but it's not the only truth, right? Thinking about what Catherine said when she said, I took the news with extreme sadness upon leaving work. I called my sponsor and went to many meetings this weekend. I was able to let them know I was struggling, right? She didn't suppress it. She didn't pretend that it was fine. She named it. I was struggling it. So it starts with sort of naming how you're feeling. And then she said, I have support in spades, and I believe both this as well as my honesty about the hardship allowed me to remain sober. Her honesty about her hardship allowed her to stay sober. And that's mindfulness, acknowledging her pain and knowing it, right? Having that internal awareness to recognizing it without drowning in it, right? Anna wrote about finding a new breath in life and hope, serenity and peace, even while saying that she missed her child that she had lost every single day. Again, she was holding both, right? The grief of separation and the peace she'd found, because both were true. Both modeled a principle of equanimity, right? Holding competing emotions in a balanced way. And so, I had to learn that grieving wasn't the same as giving up, right? I could still feel that loss and still have the motivation to keep fighting. So I sat with the disappointment, but this is the mindfulness part, right? Sitting with the disappointment, but also recognizing that other things were true, that my clients had and I had fought till the very end, that my client Anna had found hope again in her family, despite the fact that I had lost as her lawyer in the termination of parental rights case. That the work continues in so many different ways every single day. And importantly, and this is the pivot that's I think is really important, is that small wins are happening at every single moment of my day, and that we need to celebrate them. And so my colleague and friend Bridget Carr tells her clinical students all the time two sort of basic principles. One is that we need to measure success in inches. So what does that mean? That means we celebrate the small wins, right? The When a caseworker might call our students back in a hearing, in a case, or clients take that first step towards sobriety, that someone comes to court for the first time. Whatever it is, I think that we as professionals and systems want to sprint through the good things that happen. I do this all the time, right? When I even sprint through the great things that are happening. I'll win a case on appeal, and then I'll just start thinking immediately about the next case. Right. So this is a noticing exercise and an invitation to all of you to slow down and sit to sort of first measure success in inches, but then also to sit in that success, right? Like marinate in it. Mary Oliver, the great poet, says that joy is not made to be a crumb, right? Enjoy it. Really savor those moments of success because we need them. We need them both for self-kindness, but also we need them to really acknowledge that the world is balanced and that while bad things are happening, there are also good things happening that our brains are skipping over. And so Kristen Neff has a sort of a short guided practice that I have found helpful in my time of need, that I invite all of us just to take a moment. It takes about a minute to try together. And so if you're comfortable just kind of closing your eyes and getting sort of in this mindset, or just soften your gaze. And first, I want you to slowly bring to your mind a struggle in your work right now, something that's hard, right? So for me, it would be, the endless fight of creating the world in termination of parental rights cases that I want to change, and all the obstacles I face. And just say to yourself that this is a moment of suffering, right? Just acknowledge that what you're doing is really, really, really hard, right? The fact that you're here taking time out of a day at a conference where you're with like-minded folks doing hard things, but also recognizing that this is really, really challenging work. Second, recognizing that suffering is part of the work. right? Part of the work that binds us all together, the many of us on this call, that you're not alone in this work, right? That you're not alone in this work with the professionals who recognize how hard this is, but also with the families that recognize on this, how hard this is. Everyone in the Zoom room recognizes this struggle, that we're in this together. And then third, placing a hand on your heart or however you want to express self-kindness and just giving yourself permission to be kind to yourself and saying, may I be kind to myself? May I give myself what I need? And then take a kind of a deep breath, right? Just this little reminder for all of us that self-kindness and recognizing that we're in this together can be really a powerful narrative. And so as you come back, I want you just to put in the chat, like as you think about reframing our your minds and recognizing the glimmers of hope, the success in inches, populate in the chat now with what's a glimmer of hope you're holding on to in your work, right? A small win, a small light in your work, and sharing it in the chat. Um, and for me right now, in the small glimmer of hope is that I came to this work as a lawyer who represents children and parents in the system, and I often have a very negative view of judges and other, decision makers in these cases. And over the past 2 years, I've gotten a chance to spend a lot of time with these decision makers. And it's been what gives me hope is recognizing that many of these views that I'd held aren't always accurate, and that there are many people out there who their heart is in the right place, trying to create the same exact world that I'm trying to create from a different perspective. And that's giving me some hope in doing this work. And so, if you could put in the chat just like a small glimmer of hope as you look out in the world and your work and whatever you do for a living, in whatever sort of area, what's that glimmer? And so, I love Alex's point in the chat about the honor of working alongside staff and families who are all learning and growing, facilitating meetings that successfully prevents a child from entering foster care. For me, a big glimmer of hope is all of these great programs that are out there, both legal and non-legal, focusing on prevention and trying to keep kids out of foster care and having much more of a collaborative relationship to support families. I love it. My coworkers, right? Seeing other people doing good work. For me, it's my law students, seeing how energized and energetic they are. Although the system is slow to change, taking small positive changes when they show up, reflecting on successful outcomes. And I would also try to marinate in them, right? Just soak in those outcomes. And so and then the big things, right? The big changes that Richard parts out, which is even having conversations about ending termination of parental rights, right? We're not there yet in creating the world that I'm in, but that I want, but just having this moment of time where you have people across the country sharing these stories, and giving space to have conversations that 30 years ago would never have happened. These are all things I needed to remind myself. I appreciate Richard's chat, because when you're in the fight, you don't take a step to zoom out to recognize that these things are happening all across the country, and that the system has changed over the years. And so, what do we have? We have self-kindness, common humanity, mindfulness. My clients taught me all of these things without using those words, right? The idea of naming the struggle, holding grief and hope together. And both of them and all my lawyer friends taught me common humanity, that we're all in this together, even across the lawyer-client divide. Some days I have all three, many days I have none. And in the sort of the space of meta self-compassion, recognizing that there are going to be moments when you can't access this because it's so hard to do the work, to do hard things. But recognizing this framework really allows you to stay in the fight for much longer than you would otherwise. In the category of glimmers of hope, though, one thing that I wanted to sort of to talk about, just to end on, is this idea about planting seeds. That one of the things about doing hard work is that we never, ever, ever know where the seeds that we are planting might sprout. It's one of the hardest things about the work with families, right? You might say something to someone that 2 years from now might then be the thing that changes their life. For those lawyers on the call, you might make an argument that gets laughed at the first 100 times, but somewhere someone picks up that argument and makes it in court and it becomes the law. And I got that gift from the Michigan Supreme Court several months after I had my crushing defeat, right? It wasn't in my case. I wasn't involved in any way, but I checked the orders. And in an order that was released several months after my appeal, here's what the Supreme Court wrote in a decision reversing a termination of parental rights case. Conducting a best interest analysis in the context of termination is not the same as deciding whether one parent should receive full custody or deciding a dispute over parenting time. Rather, and this is the important point, the best interest analysis in the termination context must consider whether retaining the parent-child relationship in some form is in each child's best interest. Those words, in some form, retaining the relationship in some form, was groundbreaking in terms of our court's jurisprudence because before we had really thought about parental rights in a binary way that either a parent can care for the child full time or their rights should be terminated. And here was that small glimmer of hope that in some form, that was the real inquiry. And then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at that time, in her concurrence, said that it said, and I quote, it does not necessarily follow that permanently terminating respondent mother's parental rights is the best course of action. Indeed, there remains an undisputed bond between these young children and the mother, so a proper best interest determination must be more nuanced and consider whether some kind of parent-child relationship is in the child's best interest. Some kind of parent-child relationship, that nuance, that is what I was arguing for. That was what I was fighting for. It was the same court. The same 7 members of the court were on the court that issued this order. They didn't cite any of my cases in the decision. I wasn't involved. It wasn't a reversal of my losses, but the principle that we must always look for a way to seek to try to preserve a parent-child bond before we can sever it. That if there is any part of that relationship that is good for that child, we need to be looking for solutions to try to figure out how to get there. Those were the words that I had been saying for years, and those are the words now the court was saying back to lawyers and judges in Michigan in that order. I don't think it was a champagne bottle moment, right? Thinking back to that lawyer who had the bottle of unopened champagne in Washington State, but it was something, right? The ideas don't just die because one case loses, and the struggle continues. And sometimes the words we speak into the void, they land somewhere we didn't expect, right? Again, we plant seeds not knowing when they will ever sprout. So that lawyer in Washington State is probably still staring at that unopened champagne bottle, but she's working hard to fix the injustices that exist in her system. The Pennsylvania lawyer who thought she was going to quit in 2014 after the loss, she stayed, and she's witnessed a decade and more of change because we keep showing up. And so my question for all of you on the call is what becomes possible when we stop demanding perfection from ourselves and we treat ourselves with the same compassion that we would treat others? We are miles and miles from justice, but we're not in this alone. And our clients, the people we think we're serving, they are teaching us every single day how to survive this work. It's the lesson that I lost. It's the lesson that I hold dear in in this work. And I want to thank you all for doing this really challenging, hard work, but also invite you to be kind to yourselves because, again, as we do hard things, as we push systems, and each one of us on this call needs to keep doing that. That if you're comfortable in the work that you do, then we're not pushing hard enough. If there's something that if there's systems that are become complacent, right, that have been doing the same things over and over again, and the professionals within those systems aren't pushing, then you're not doing enough. And so we have to keep getting to that edge where we keep pushing harder and harder and harder. But with that comes the need for us to restore ourselves so we can keep pushing and navigating setbacks. Because again, if we don't have setbacks in this work, then we're not doing the work the right way. So thank you all for being here, and I would invite now Lisa to come join me for hopefully a little conversation about how we might do this.
Thank you so much. Lots of really interesting comments in the chat. I was really struck by Kristen Neff's work, and what a beautiful kind of journey. Thank you for letting us into your world as you experience setbacks, because I think it just, um, sometimes people have images, right, of people like legends, and the fact that you could be so vulnerable in your process and what that looked like, I think is quite valuable to so many other people who are in the space and experience setbacks regularly as well. I have kind of, I know you're a dad, and I'm just curious, like, as I was sitting here thinking, like, how are these lessons of self-compassion as you are expressing them in your work and in your personal lives, like how is that translating to how you parent?
Yeah, such a great question. I often tell my law students that in terms of my identity and how I identify myself, I think my status as a lawyer comes in like maybe third or fourth of the things that are most important to me. And that I think, for me, probably tied for number one is, being a husband, being a dad. But I think that these messages um, of not kicking yourself when you're down, I think seeing success all over the place and it's how you define it, and constantly trying to do things that are hard are lessons that are like core to who I am as a parent, which is I think that I want my kids to try things that are difficult, challenging, but then also do the things to care for themselves that allow them to keep doing that. And I think that's the message. I think that like most people on this call are probably really good at the doing the of like constantly trying to do hard things. They're here, they're learning, they're in systems that demand that you have to, you're just fighting, fighting, fighting. The part though that I think is often missing, and I know that people from all over the world are on this call, but especially so I can speak to what it's like in America, is that other piece of like making sure you are like rejecting this idea of like grind culture of just always giving, that we as humans can give, 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 and then not do anything to take care of ourselves to allow us to keep giving. And I've tried to, I think, model that with my family. I think as a parent, modeling is probably the best thing that I can do as opposed to saying anything to them. And so they see me, keeping up the kind of the restorative habits, going to the gym, going for walks, reading, having fun, connecting with friends, having friends, having sort of a really close network of people that really are my safe haven, my place that I go to. It's really funny that Brian Stevenson quote from the paper
Mhm.
yesterday really struck a chord in me in that this idea that if we need to do hard things, he was talking about this hotel. He's like, and it's right near the museums in Montgomery. And he created this hotel because he's like, people need, after you experience that, you need a sanctuary to restore yourself because it's so hard to sit through. And I've been there to the museum and to the memorial, and it's just devastating about both the historical practices, but what we continue to do in America today. But that's that piece that is so beautiful about him is that he recognizes how hard it is to do that. And he's like, we need space. We need space. And he's talking about in the civil rights movement for so many black families, it was the church where they would
Right.
sing and love and make music and have joy and I just think about like all of us together, like are we really creating spaces right now that for those of us doing hard work, we can nourish ourselves? And I just worry that that's not the conversation going on, that it is all about the fight. And I think the fight is important, but we can't do the fight well if we don't have those other spaces.
Maybe the fight and the grind.
Yeah.
right? And it's the kind of the bureaucratic nature of the work where we just cycle through without taking moments to breathe, to think, to be mindful, to enter into richer dialogue, to do deep listening.
Yes.
Sometimes I think that's part of it too, for how these um, systems that we all exist in um, don't necessarily afford that type of environment.
And we think that the grind is effective, that in these moments where we're tired and exhausted, that we're somehow going to push through and come out on the other side. And what we've seen in the United States with lawyer well-being statistics is that it fails, right? It fails in I think a couple of respects. One is in terms of statistics about our own ability to take care of ourselves with high rates of alcoholism, divorce rates, mental health challenges. We also see that though in our behaviors with other human beings, that in our professional spaces, right?
Yeah.
The lack of complete sort of relational civility or kindness to one another in an adversarial system. You have judges yelling at litigants. You have caseworkers yelling at parents. And I think I'm really motivated by the work of folks like Brene Brown. And one of the things she talks about is being grounded. That the idea that we have to, before we can go do work with other people, we have to be grounded and we have to know who we are. We have to know who we want to be, and we have to take the practices seriously that allow us to do the hard work. And too often we skip over that and just want to go do the hard work. And we're often causing damage when we do that to others unknowingly, right? Because
Right.
of and I that reframe has really helped me sort of lean into this self-compassion work because I often just get mad at the lawyers who are acting in a way that none of it's not helpful and not productive. But I think the recognition that oftentimes that is just really their pain talking, and they're just taking it out on whoever happens to come in their way, and that what spaces are we creating to actually help folks process that pain? And I think certain professions might be better at it. The legal profession is really horrible at it, right? We don't normalize those conversations in law school. We don't normalize any of those spaces when we start practicing. And then as a result, folks keep that stuff inside of them, and then you see behaviors that are really harmful to systems and people.
I mean, it seems to be like there's so much restorative principles that could kind of get um, that could be really important to embed in all the systems that work with, children and families, whether it's the legal system or, child welfare, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and Lisa,
Um,
like one of the things, I think that's exactly right. And I mean, there are going to be people, there are going to be leaders on this call who are looking to try to figure out what to do, right? How do you create these systems where we lean into some of these principles of compassion for the people who are doing the hard work?
mhm,
And one of the things that we've just really enjoyed doing, a couple of us are doing this now, is leading almost these immersive retreats for child welfare professionals, but we're expanding it to other folks as well, where we take 2 days out of people's busy schedules. We go out into nature and really give people the space to talk openly about how the work is impacting them and how can they respond to themselves and to the people in their systems in a more humane, compassionate way. Because I think what we see in systems right now is when people aren't um, acknowledging their own loss and suffering in the work, their brain is in sort of super, we call it like our amygdala being hijacked, right?
mhm,
It's easily triggered by bad facts, and immediately, right? I think of my students in my appellate clinic that when they first get the petition of the client that we're going to represent, their brains immediately go to, I can't represent this person because it's horrible, right? It's like the worst things that
right.
anyone's ever done on a piece of paper. And we joke that if someone wrote that about me, like you would hate me too. And but we slow the process down, and we always say to our students who react that way, just go spend the next 2 weeks and get to know this person. And then if after those
Mhm.
2 weeks are done, if you can't do it, we will find a way for you to do something else. And without fail, 2 weeks later, they are completely empathetic and compassionate to what that parent has gone through. because oftentimes they realize that when they learn the story and get proximate with another human being, that
Hmm.
parent was in foster care themselves, that parent might have been
Hmm.
adopted, that parent had been a victim of domestic violence, the system had ignored their needs. The list goes on because we complexify the narrative. But to get our brains to a place where we can do that, we have to tend to like our whole selves. And I worry that in our system that is so full of judgment and shame and hate, we will never get to the point where we can truly understand kids and parents if we ourselves don't. We're not that we have to become the professionals we want to be in these spaces, and
Hmm.
that's hard work. And so I would really invite folks to think about how to do that. It's all relational, it's all small group work, it's all taking the time out of busy schedules to go in. And people can find my contact info online, or it's probably in the materials somewhere, but I'm happy to talk through how we do that work because I have been convinced that it's probably one of I really enjoy my appellate work, but in terms of like contributions, is like shifting the conversation to this space where how can we care for ourselves so we can care for others effectively.
Right. And a couple of thoughts came to mind as you were talking. It's like, how can we reorient the work? How can we, for the people that do child protection or child welfare work, it's it was intended always to be relational, but we've moved away from because of the processes and kind of the bureaucratization of it. People aren't necessarily having time or space, and maybe even now inclination to be in deep relationships with the people that we're supposed to be in service to. And so I think kind of one of the big, like, kind of, I don't know, challenges up ahead is figuring out if you don't have any more resources, how can you reorient or change the work so that it does reflect relationship-based work? Because we know that change happens in relationship. And the other thing that, as you were speaking, I have I'm sure we all have like little thoughts or, people who we follow and quotes in our head. And I was just thinking about your student and spending 2 weeks, right? And what came to my head was Father Greg Boyle and Homeboy Industries, right? That every single one of us is unshakably good. And if we lead with that as our premise and we believe it in our heart, then you will be able to, find the goodness in every single person. It also starts in believing that you yourself are unshakably good too.
Yeah, I mean, what a great invitation to folks on the call of reminding before you enter any space with another human being, whether that's you're taking the docket as a judge or a caseworker working with a family, that having that mantra that everyone is unshakably good. And then I think part of what we unpack at our retreats is what prevents us from reminding ourselves of that before we do the work, right? And so you mentioned time, right? A lot of this is like remembering and noticing. Father Greg Boyle in his recent book talks about how the fact that like most people know how to be kind, they just forget because
Mhm.
you're like right, you're in the sprint of the day, and you forget. There's a real famous study about the Good Samaritan, and a bunch of seminary students had just been trained about and told about the story of the Good Samaritan, and then which is about helping others in need. And then like half the group were told that they were late for a meeting, and the other half were told they was no time constraints, and then they had to go to this meeting. And then there was a person on the street that was, a plant by the study folks who uh, who was in need. And the folks who had just been told that there were seminary students just been told about this story walked by this human being in like disproportionate ways without helping. And I just think that has such lessons for all of us in time-starved systems that we've got to get this muscle of noticing. We've got to slow down. And yes, time is a barrier, but it doesn't take that much time to acknowledge another human being and recognize them, to talk to a colleague in need, to you can say a little bit of stuff can go a long way.
That's for sure. We have come to the conclusion of our time. What a beautiful conversation, obviously rooted in um, self-compassion, right? Remind everyone to be self-kind, common humanity, and mindfulness as we move forward. I think, struck a chord with our participants as we've really tried to build some space for people to have time to think about the inner restoration that is necessary to do this work. And so I just want to thank you and know that your words, your stories, the testimony that you gave, and the way in which you did it with great self-kindness and I would say even bravery will make a difference to this community and to many others who you continue to impact. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And I want to especially thank all the people who joined in on this session and participated in the chat, and just thank the folks on this call for doing the hard work and reminding ourselves that this is really tough stuff, and that leaning into just being kind to yourself and recognizing how hard this work is such a crucial recognition. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.